How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. It has been a while, so thank you for joining me here. Going to give you a little life update and where I've been and why it's been over a month since the last episode. Any of you that follow me on social media might know a few weeks ago I got married. I'm now a happily married man. And for those of you watching on YouTube, will notice that the studio looks a bit different now. That's because me and the wife are recently homeowners. We've been in this new house for about 3 weeks or so, right? We were crazy enough to get married and buy a house in the same week. So July was pretty crazy. So it just made more sense to take the month off from the episodes. I had enough, going on in my life, as you can imagine. But now we are back, and you can see the new studio is pretty much set up. There's probably a few things I might tinker with here. No guests on the episode today, just kind of catching up on life and some of the stuff that I've missed talking about in the world of sports. So that is where I have been, and now I am back. And as you can see, like I said, the studio is pretty much set up. I can start having episodes again, whether the guests are in person with me or back to, Zoom interviews with people. And I do have some lined up, but I just figured it made more sense for the first episode back to just be me kind of catching up on, everything that's been going on. So while I've had all those positive things to talk about in my life over the past month, I do want to start the episode on somewhat of a somber note. I think it made more sense to start with this and end with this. But yesterday, waking up to the news that Florida State legendary coach Bobby Bowden has passed away. And, as a UCF, alumni, former student, however you want to label me, I have been to several Florida State games. I have a lot of friends that went to Florida State. Some of them have been on the show, someone like Richard or Brian back in the early episodes. So I've been to plenty of Florida State games, and I know plenty of people that are Florida State fans. And, I have no problem watching them or rooting for them, especially this year, now that McKenzie Milton will be we assume, starting quarterback for the Seminoles. So it's pretty easy for me to root for Florida State, even though I am a big, UCF guy. One thing I want to drive home here for those that don't know, maybe people that are a little younger than me, because I did catch, the tail end of his coaching career, over half a century, almost 44 years as a head coach at both, West Virginia and then at Florida State. If you are a fan of college football, whether you know it or not, you owe a lot to Bobby Bowden, because he's a lot of the reason why college football is what it is and why it's enjoyable as it is. And a lot of people, you might be surprised on, the coaching tree, the guys both in the pros and in college, branch off of Bobby Bowden. And while, Florida State hasn't quite been the same since he left, he's always kind of had a piece of that. Something's been missing at that school ever since Bobby Bowden left. And really, Jimbo Fisher was able to, pick up the baton pretty nicely and, win a national championship in 2013 after they got rid of Bobby Bowden in 2009. Some will still say that he was kind of forced out. The way Bobby Bowden was removed wasn't, the perfect way for Florida State to handle it. But I felt like there was no way to do that wasn't going to be awkward for somebody. And I truly do think they handled it as well as they can. And, there never seemed to be any ill will from Bobby Bowden. He still showed up to plenty of Florida State events and games and everything. And, was a big part of the school up until, his passing at 91 years of age. So, I think I speak for a lot of us. If I could sign up for 91 right now, I would. But, 44 years coaching, 377 wins, which is second all time. Of course, there's 2 national championships in the 90s, 93 and 99. And if you watch back in the day, there was, plenty of opportunities for them to get even more. They could have easily been, while they only have the 2 national championships, easily I'd consider them, along with Miami, kind of like Alabama of the 90s. And of course, he's in the College Football Hall of Fame, 32 bowl appearances and 21 wins, which is the second most among all coaches. So just a great guy. Not that I ever had the honor of meeting him, but definitely, seeing the benefits of how he built up a school like Florida State, which it's hard to believe. It's a little bit easier to believe now because, Florida State's a little bit on the decline, but what they were before he got there and, that run of dominance, I'll still call it, that Bobby Bowden had. And really a lot of people, whether you know it or not, owe a lot of what college football is to Bobby Bowden. So I'll end the Bobby Bowden talk with 2 quick stories. One people have probably heard, and then another one that's probably a little lesser known that I've heard over, people have been sharing their stories and whatnot. But one was during, the heat of the rivalry between the Gators and the Seminoles. There was, a pregame scuffle between both teams, which is not surprising. I'm sure that happened almost every game. And one of the quarterbacks apparently threw a football at Bobby Bowden and it missed him. And after the game, apparently he was being interviewed about, the game in general, but, the fight as well. And apparently the Gator quarterback, to try to throw a football, Bobby Bowden was not punished or penalized for any reason. So they asked Bobby, what would you have done if one of your quarterbacks threw a football at the other coach? And to kind of jab it, I assume it was Spurrier coaching at the time. He said, well, if one of my quarterbacks threw a football at a coach, it probably would have hit him at least. So, just a nice little look into the humor that Bobby Bowden would have had. Another one stems back to, my UCF roots here. Not a lot of people have heard this one, but I thought this was very interesting and very encapsulating on the kind of guy and man that Bobby Bowden was. But in the 80s, UCF was still a Division II, double A, whatever they called it back then, football program. And they were in the playoffs because, Division II actually has a playoff. Go figure that. And wherever they had to travel, they were a lower seed. So it was an away game for them. And they were traveling to a school that used field turf in an era where, if you had it, it was kind of a home field advantage because you didn't play on it very often. And the type of cleats you need to effectively play on turf is way different than your normal grass cleats, you could say. So Bobby Bowden, hearing about this, donated excess turf cleats that he had in his facility in his program and donated them to UCF so they'd be properly equipped to take on the playoff game in, again, wherever it might have been in the FCS level. So back in the day, definitely a guy that never minded, helping out when he could and when he had, things to offer other programs at the time. People, if you've seen the movie We Are Marshall, that is a very true story where as the head coach of West Virginia gave the, playbooks and things and play film for Marshall to help get back on their feet after the horrific, plane crash back in those days. So just two perfect examples of him helping people that he, did not need to and just did out of the kindness of his heart. So rest in peace, Coach Bowden, and thank you for all you did for the sport and the game that we love. Okay, I got through that part without, too many tears here. Definitely one or two, spilled yesterday, but got through that part. And again, rest in peace. And thanks for everything that you've done. I'm going to stick with some college football news here. Probably the most surprising in the month that I've been off, but these news stories of Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 and presumably on their way to the SEC. At the moment, there is a soft, penciled in deal that they could be there as soon as 2025, unless they want to pay a giant exiting fee of what I believe is $80 million from what I'm hearing. And to me, Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm sure you can tell me, yes, they're going to make a lot of more money. And while that might be true, Oklahoma, the reason for both of these schools not doing this as being a bad move, in my opinion, are for two completely different reasons. We're going to start with Oklahoma. It's a much easier way to explain. They've won, 6 or 7 of the past in a row Big 12 championships. They're a shoo-in for the playoff every year. This is an example of they're literally going to sacrifice wins and potentially championships, both at the conference level and potentially national championship, just for more money. And I don't know if, the things that were lost, the funds that were lost during COVID seasons is playing into effect here, but like Oklahoma's in a pretty good spot right now that they're, they win the Big 12. They almost always get in the playoff. And when they get in the playoff, they tend to play an SEC school and they don't do too hot. So what I want to know is if you're going to get blown out by 30 in a playoff game, why do you want to do that all year round is where, my question for them would come. Texas is a little more, the Longhorns, it's a little more extended for me. You can go all the way back to, Texas is underachieved for most of the decade. Let's say, 2009, they were in the national championship. People remember Colt McCoy gets knocked out in the first quarter. Alabama wins, kind of kicks off that dynasty, right? I'm going to go all the way back to, that day. That was, a peak Texas team. And if Colt McCoy stays in that game, you never know what will happen. Because even with the backup in, they had some sort of a chance at one point in that game. So that was 2009, right? It's 12 years ago. So I'm going to quickly, because we don't want to read stats all day, but I'm going to quickly go through the past 11 Texas football seasons, and you'll see a little bit of a pattern here. So 2010, 5-7, 2011, 8-5. They won a Holiday Bowl. 9-4 the next year, won an Alamo Bowl. 8-5, 6-7. They lost the Alamo Bowl and the Texas Bowl. 5-7 in 2015 and 16. 7-6 and 17. Won a Texas Bowl. 2018 is the outlier here. They're 10-4. And they won a Sugar Bowl. They did lose the Big 12 championship game to, you guessed it, Oklahoma, which is their only appearance in that game in this 11-year stretch. But they did win a Sugar Bowl, and that was the infamous, hey, Longhorn Nation, we're back. And spoilers, they're not back. 8-5 in 2019, won an Alamo Bowl, and 2020 COVID season 7-5, won an Alamo Bowl. So while they are riding a 4-year bowl win streak, that was not enough to keep their coach, as they've done yet another coach shuffle. But if you take that 11-year stretch of games and you average it out, if you do the math, and I'm not going to make you do it, I did it ahead of time, they're averaging 7 wins a year in the past 11 to 12 years there. So if you're barely, bowl eligible in the Big 12, what do you think is going to happen when you get to the SEC? Like, Oklahoma makes a speckle of sense because they've at least, have the reputation of being champions, and maybe with that extra money, they'll boost themselves into the level. But if you're averaging, 7 to 9 wins, even, let's say, in the Big 12, maybe you're only going to average 5 to 8. And if Texas fans are pissed with 9 wins, they're definitely going to be pissed with 6 or 5. So I don't fully understand why. And Texas is a school, one of the few schools that probably doesn't need the money. Here's another thing that people aren't thinking about. If they go to the SEC, that Longhorn network that probably brings them a lot of money, that's going to go away. The SEC has its own network. If Alabama doesn't have its own TV network, they're not going to let Texas have one either. So as it's easy to say, yeah, Texas goes to the SEC, they'll make more money that way. I don't see that necessarily being the case. If anything, it's a lateral move at best, and it'll be, be a net loss because they're not going to win as much, and they're not winning enough for their boosters and their fans and their coaches to keep their jobs as it is. So, Oklahoma is one thing, but I don't know. I feel like this is they're outthinking the room here. Like joining SEC for schools this big makes sense when you don't think about it. Like, it sounds cool. It sounds like something you do on NCAA 14, right? You can shuffle the conferences around and kind of get new matchups. But overall, I don't think this is a good move for them. And if it does end up happening, which it is leaning that way, I'm interested to see if, Oklahoma's used to winning 10 to 11, sometimes 12 games a year. What happens when they go down to 8 or 9? And they're not going to be happy either. So, they're going to, if you're not going to be dominant, or, if you can't even be dominant where you are, I don't know what makes you think you're going to be able to do it in the SEC. So that creates questions for them and their future, but it also creates questions for the future of the Big 12 with the remaining 8 schools like Kansas State, Oklahoma State, places like that. And there's been rumors that, they might try to tack on, some American schools, some Mountain West schools like Boise State, like my Knights, teams like Memphis and Cincinnati, some of the higher end group of 5 schools, which I, always have to put air quotes on that because those aren't real things. I'm sorry to tell you guys, there's no NCAA definitive, levels of group of 5 and Power 5. This is stuff that we've made up to make some schools seem bigger than others. You can't tell me that Memphis and Cincinnati and UCF are not, at the same level as a Wake Forest just because they're in a Power 5 conference and, other schools like that. I hate to pick on Wake Forest. That was just the one I thought of in my head. So to me, going to the Big 12 is not a slam dunk at the moment because it is very shaky, especially if their 2 biggest breadwinners do leave the conference. I think it's much more likely, and this has been talked about too, just not as much, that some of these remaining schools find themselves in the American and in the Mountain West. Some of the schools that make a little more sense, like a West Virginia, for example, might come over. Kansas State would be great for football reasons, but also because when people talk about these conferences, they kind of forget sometimes that they have to play all these sports. So I think it would be a big boost in the basketball arena too for some of these schools to come over. So it's pretty 50-50 right now, but if I have a choice, I'd rather these schools come to the American that does have a bit bigger TV deal, or at least will when they have to renegotiate without Texas and Oklahoma at the table for leverage. So if UCF goes to the Big 12, and obviously they wouldn't go alone, they would go with the Memphises and the Cincinnatis and the other schools that I've mentioned. It could work out. It could be fine. But if I have a choice, feels up to me for some god awful reason. Them going to those schools coming to the American makes a lot more sense than UCF treading into the shakiest. If it is a Power 5 conference, it's the shakiest of them. And there's still a solid chance that the Big 12 kind of dissolves. And if it does, I think it's pretty obvious that the American would take some of those schools and then become one of those Power 5 conferences. So if I'm, UCF, if I'm Memphis, if I'm Cincinnati, I'm kind of holding my ground for a minute and see if the Big 12 even has a plan before they jump over to, like, I've always liked the American. I think it's a pretty, competitive conference, and the TV deal is good. You get on TV, you get on ESPN, and, while they could be making more money, it just seems more stable than, some of these other, conferences that are trying to keep this Power 5 status that, again, as I mentioned, is imaginary, but it just makes you, pay more. And I do think adding these schools when they re-up their TV contracts, which is when we talk the money in these conferences, that's where a lot of it comes from, is the TV contracts. So I just think that those schools going to the American makes a lot more sense than scampering over to the Big 12. And there's a very real possibility in the next 3 to 5 years that the Big 12 just is no more. So what else do we have going on here? The NFL Hall of Fame weekend has just passed us. We had the Hall of Fame game, which, while I'm always excited for there to finally be football on TV, I never usually catch a lot of this. I know it was the Cowboys and the Steelers, and I caught a little bit of it. I saw the Cowboys kick a field goal in the opening drive and score no points after that. And then I saw Mason Rudolph turn the ball over, so that makes it officially football season. The Hall of Fame went off great. As an Eagles fan, it was great to see Harold Carmichael in there. So obviously headlined the double class. They had to do 2020 and 2021. Peyton Manning went in, which was easily one of the highlights of it. And he got to go with an old teammate, Edgerrin James, which was cool to see. But obviously Harold Carmichael would be the highlight for me. And we're only going to have 3 preseason games this year. I think this is a great transition here. I think 4 was always unnecessary. I would actually like to see us get to the point where we only have 2. We kind of have one where the starters play maybe a half into 3 quarters. And then that second game is always that, bubble game where guys are just trying to make the team end up on that. But 3 is a great start, and it's going to feel a little weird, I guess, for people that are so used to the 4. But people forget there are years, in the 80s and 70s and stuff, they used to play 6. They played damn near half a season in preseason. So, I mean, just like you look at that and you're like, how could we ever play 6? I think there's going to be a point where we're looking at old games and like, how did we ever play 4? So the NFL and college football is right around the corner, really. We're within a month countdown. I'm definitely looking forward to getting to the bounce house, seeing some UCF games, and maybe I'll take in a Jaguar game or something. Got to get with Kramer on that. What else do we have going on? A little bit of NBA free agency talk. To me, the biggest story is definitely Russell Westbrook going to the Lakers. And while normally I would roll my eyes when someone just goes to the Lakers for the money, or the Celtics or the Yankees or whatever the sport it might be, this is one that I actually don't mind, because I think we all know, Russ went to UCLA. He is a California guy. He's kind of lost his shine a little bit. While he's equally as productive, he's just not looked at as the guy that has to be the centerpiece anymore. And, as you guys know, if you watch the show for anything like that, I'm not a big LeBron guy, but this does give him a chance to, maybe snag one more on his way out. And I do think, Russell Westbrook is a perfect guy that he can just let go nuts during the regular season anyway, because, people know this about LeBron. He doesn't care that much about the regular season anymore. He can, let Russ do all his thing, average his triple-double, and then kind of take over in the playoffs. So between him, Anthony Davis, he's got to stay healthy. That's always been the biggest thing with him. LeBron may have found the perfect 2 guys to, maybe get one more, and they've added, a couple other guys in free agency. My Magic have done nothing, so there's no reason to mention that. Robin Lopez, I think, is the only Orlando Magic free agent signing so far. But this is going to be sort of a quick one here, guys, but I did just want to get out here and to get my face back in front of the camera, show off the new studio, and I'll probably be back in another week or 2 with a guest, and we'll be getting back to normal. So this has been the Phil Talk Sports Podcast, and I'll catch you